Where am I? I lost my job at A&T College in 1932. It was the beginning of the Depression, and many of us, there were two persons on staff, the woman lost the job. That Christmas, we came to New York for the holiday and to visit my husband's mother. And walking along the streets of Harlem, I ran into the editor of the Amsterdam News, who knew something about my work, had seen some of the things that I could write, and he had a job that he had really tried to get a man to do, because he said it was a man's job. It was organizing a national syndicate for the Amsterdam News. When he ran to me, he said, "I think you could do that job." And I was glad to get it, because I was out of the secretarial field and able to do some creative writing. I worked there for 2 or 3 years. 1935, the editorial workers at the Amsterdam News had joined the newspaper guild, and the woman who owned the paper became quite frightened, did not want to negotiate with us, although we were not asking for money, any advance in salary, anything like that, just union recognition. I walked in one day, I was always the earliest one there, and she greeted me with, "Do you work here?" I said I thought I did, and went upstairs to the editorial office. She wouldn't give me the mail, and waited for the others to arrive, and they were all greeted the same way, "Do you work here?" Later that day, she sent the bookkeeper to say that Mrs. Davis is dismissing the whole editorial staff. So it was a lockout and not a strike, although we were preparing to strike. And we very quickly got a headquarters in the neighborhood, got our picket signs, and went to picketing. This was 11 weeks before Christmas, so it must have been in October. It was interesting how the community, the whole Harlem community, rallied around us. One of the people I had always wanted to know, who came quite often to our headquarters, was Ben Davis. And he would talk to us and gave us great courage. And I was very flattered that every time he was in the headquarters and I went out on the picket line, he went out on the picket line with me. And it wasn't hard to draw me out about my mother and my father, because I can talk about them endlessly. And finally one day he said to me, "Why aren't you in the Communist Party? You have a much better background for it than I do." And I answered, "No one ever asked me." And I can see him now, just how he stopped on that picket line and laughed. And the story got all around Harlem that she's not in the party because no one ever asked her. Of course, it wasn't very long before I was asked. Very shortly after the strike was over. It ended Christmas Eve, 1935. And early in 1936, I joined the Communist Party. One of the most joyful events in my life, I think. I know how much I have gained from it. My mother My father by this time was dead. He died in 1927. And my mother had sold our house in Prospect Park and had moved to Kansas City with my sister, who had married Roy Wilkins' brother, and he also was working at the Kansas City Call. The very day after I joined the Communist Party, my mother turned up on the scene. She came to New York to visit her daughter. My house was filled with my new young friends, many of them white, a few black, and I hadn't had time to tell my mother yet that I had joined the Communist Party when a young man went up to her and said, "What do you think of your communist daughter?" And my mother said, "I'm not at all surprised. She was brought up on Marx and Lenin," which was true. I was very grateful to to my mother for making it easy for me.